everybody. Hello. You know me, probably. Tori Robinson. You know my passion for epilepsy, epileptology, neuroscience and research. Today, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Simon Keller, who's from the University of Liverpool and does really, really exciting neuroimaging into epilepsy. He's one of the cool people that brings up like all those colourful pictures of brains. Simon, tell us about yourself.
Hey, Tori. Yeah, I'm a neuroimager.
What does that mean in English?
A neuroimager means someone who is using brain scans of some description, typically MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, to look at the brain, how it's structured, how it functions, and how the structure and function can change in response to injury or disease or disorders. And I've exclusively had an interest in epilepsy for 20 years now. I can tell you the reasons why.
Please do, yeah. Tell us what got you into it. Well, finish your sentence. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so that's usually what we do. We use MRI scanners mainly.
Which type of MRI? Because there's two types, aren't there?
If there are, I'm not aware of it.
Oh, okay. Well, no. So some documents. So
there's
sorry.
like CT scans. There's MRI scanners.
Yeah.
PET scanners, SPECT scanners.
So like is it functional MRI scanners and then thingy-majiggy, whatever it is?
Okay, so you can do all the same things on the same MRI scanner. Yeah, you can do structural.
It used to be two separate. Yeah, now together. Structural and functional. There you go, everyone.
You can do it all in the same scanning session on the same scanner, which is what we're trying to do at the moment, trying to get as much information for each patient as possible, just to try and figure out what's going on and how we can predict, for example, whether someone will develop epilepsy in the first instance, whether that patient will respond well to drugs or not, or whether they'll respond well to surgery or not. And that's mainly the area I'm mostly interested in, is to try to predict something for a patient's outcome. So it's really clinically applicable.
And do you know what? Loads of people don't know the difference between clinical and, what's the other word again? Clinical and...
Basic research, they sometimes call it, or preclinical, where they're working either with animals or on a basic level. Yeah. Well, basic is probably the wrong word. We use the word basic and fundamental to describe something that isn't working directly with patients.
Okay, so like, yeah, I'm thinking of some people who are in a lab and they're testing certain stuff on mice, for instance, and then should that be successful, then it can be tested on patients.
Right? Then yes, translational research, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, I love the word trans. Okay. So tell us what got you into epilepsy and the research that you're doing. Why are you so passionate about it?
Oh, it's a good question. I think my interest in the brain all started with my nan, who had a stroke. She had 3 strokes actually, and I became fascinated by how she had what we call unilateral impairments. So when you have damage on one side of the brain, it can affect the actions on the other side of the body. And for example, her writing and her speech was really affected. And so I became really interested in the brain at that level. And then I did a couple of degrees, and in my master's...
As one does, just a couple of degrees. Okay, great.
They weren't anything to do with medicine, to be honest.
Really? What were they?
My first degree was psychology.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but I became very interested in how the brain mediates you as a person, your cognition. And so everything starts from the brain. And then I did a master's degree in neuroscience. And it was the research project in the neuroscience degree that gave me my first exposure of epilepsy.
Mm.
Yeah, I had a bunch of brain scans to analyze, but also had the opportunity to go to patients' houses right across North Wales and Merseyside and assess patients in their own homes on various language abilities. And I started talking to more and more patients, and then I was hooked. It was definitely from a patient angle. And then I managed to do a PhD in patient-orientated clinical research in epilepsy. I never looked back, really. So it was kind of that project that in the master's degree that changed everything.
How interesting. In your world, your career, like most careers, I think it's quite competitive, isn't it? Which is a good thing, because if you guys compete to make lives better, that's brilliant. I think you have to have a passion to really be in your field. Lots of people drop out because, well, for various reasons, which we could go into, but I want people to know that people like yourself who have been in the field for such a long time, researching epilepsy, trying to make people's lives better long term, it's because you've got a passion for it.
Absolutely, 100%. That's the thing that drives us all, I think, whether you're a clinician or a non-clinical researcher. You're there because of the love of the job and the impact it can make. In fact, I don't think I've ever met another PI, a principal investigator, who doesn't love their work.
Well, same here so far, but I haven't got far yet. But as I said before, you're my third interview. So this is great. So tell us, like, what do you actually do in your job in layman's terms? Like you've said, like you do like lots of scans and like what the overview is, but what do you do, for instance, day to day?
Day to day, well, it's really multifaceted. There's lots of different things we do. People like myself want to do as much research as we can, but things get in the way, like administration, and
right.
We do lots of teaching, and I do enjoy the teaching because you have the opportunity to influence students. There's lots of, for example, students that become interested in epilepsy in light of the lectures that you can give. So I do like that, and that gets students wanting to do, for example, PhDs in epilepsy related projects.
And is that the University of Liverpool as well?
Yeah, at the moment it's the University of Liverpool. Yeah, but I've been lecturing on epilepsy all over Europe and the States as well. It's just how it goes over the years. But like I say, you want to be doing as much research as possible. I do anyway. This is the reason I got into the job. And at this time, it tends to be managing people to do the research. 10 years ago, I'd be there actively doing it myself. But as you build a lab, you need to, well, first of all, you need to find the money to bring people to the lab. That's always a problem, as you know, because of the lack of funds in epilepsy-related research.
Which is ridiculous considering how many people are affected. It's yes, we need research for all sorts of things in human health, yes, but come on, humans. So many of us are affected. I don't really... Is it? Well, you're making it cool to talk about and to think about, and hopefully I'm helping to do that. But I think generally, globally, it's not considered a priority because people don't talk about it so much, and the stigma, I guess. Would you agree?
I 100% agree. In fact, every grant application I put in, I start off about the size of the problem with epilepsy and the fact that it's, relatively speaking, so underfunded. And this is why it's fantastic to have resources such as Epilepsy Research UK, which is dedicated to epilepsy research. But I do think that even some of the major research councils, in particular the Medical Research Council, they're listening and they do want to fund. So I'm also funded by the Medical Research Council on looking at patients with a brand new diagnosis of epilepsy, to look right at the beginning of not just when it's patients with refractory epilepsy going to surgery, and we do need to understand what's happening right at the beginning, and people like the MRC, organizations like the MRC are helping. But still, when you look at epilepsy and the prevalence of epilepsy, relatively speaking, we don't have the same amount of research and the same amount of funding being done relative to something that's more niche, which is a shame, I think. Yeah.
So you think part of the reason that we don't have enough funding is because it's more generalized, or were you saying this is niche? Sorry.
No, I don't think it is niche. I think you find areas of research that because I have to be careful because I'm being recorded what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know, right? That's what I could keep going through my brain.
Yeah, I would never want to say anything's politically motivated or anything like this, but you look at the statistics, you look at the amount of funds, and there's got to be a reason why epilepsy is relatively underfunded. You can speculate as to the reasons why, which I don't really want to do right now.
We'll do that off camera. Yeah. Okay. But if anybody's got any ideas why you think that it might be underfunded, and I think we need, when we're thinking about that, we need to look at things from the perspective of people who are unaffected as well as those who are affected.
That's right. I think one important factor as well, Tori, is that I think a lot of people don't understand the impact of epilepsy on someone's lives.
Right.
Even if, for example, a patient has well-controlled seizures, and lots of people may think that's it, that's the problem sorted. It's not. It's far from it. There's lots of issues that we need to look at. I think I didn't want to commit on a particular reason why it was underfunded, but it could potentially be because epilepsy is still to some extent misunderstood, and it goes beyond having seizures. We need to make people aware of that.
And I said this I think I make a point of talking about this in every single talk that I do. is that it is not just seizures. I would rather have a seizure every day than suffer the comorbidities, specifically that being mental health. Every single day I would happily, well, not happily, but I would rather have a seizure. And I think that that is rarely understood. Like you say, people think, right, you're on a few pills or one if you're lucky, and that is it, all over. Not at all. I really think that we do need to focus more on the mental health side of those affected. And actually what was really interesting, I read a paper, well, half a paper because I can't read them very well yet, but it was about how there are signs that a person is going to develop epilepsy before they actually do, specifically as a child. And I can't remember how they found this out, if they would by chance were just taking random kids and giving them MRIs or whatever, but they would notice that there were actually differences before the epilepsy developed, particularly in mental health.
Okay. I've not seen this particular paper, but this is the whole area of epilepsy research that interests me the most. It's the identification of biomarkers of something that will happen in the future, either the development of epilepsy, the development of the comorbidities, predicting the response to treatment, for example. And incidentally, that's very much what Galid is involved in at the moment. His PhD is trying to predict seizure recurrence in patients who present with a first seizure, and looking at all sorts of things like brain scans, EEGs, blood serum markers of inflammation, and just anything you can get to try and predict who will be diagnosed with epilepsy from a first seizure. Because, of course, lots of first seizures aren't actually epilepsy related.
Right, exactly. So how do you get the people involved in your research?
Well, it depends on what level. There's collaborative research with other groups that can always happen. We can have patients volunteering to be involved in the research by recruiting for various studies that are available. That's another opportunity. For students who are interested, there's always opportunities to join my lab, for example, and other people's labs doing research on different levels, whether you want to do a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD. So there's various ways that everyone can contribute. And even people on the street who don't have epilepsy or who are interested, we still do brain imaging studies that need volunteers to compare brain scans, for example, of those people to people with epilepsy. And so we're constantly advertising for those. So
if anybody's interested, I mean, I don't know if this is the time or the place, but shut me up if not. But if they're interested in volunteering for your research, where do they go?
It might be great if you put a link to our lab at some point. In the lab, there's contact details there for volunteering for epilepsy research.
We have actually your lab on the epilepsysparks.com/labs. You are listed on there. It's Liverpool Lab, isn't it? Is that what you call it?
It's called Liverpool Brain Lab.
Liverpool Brain, okay.
The brain stands for Brain Research Using Advanced Imaging in Neurology.
That's too long.
So we reduced it to brain. It's not exclusively epilepsy.
Okay.
Because I've been encouraged to reach out, and I have an interest in, for example, Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis and brain infections. But I'll always at heart be an epilepsy researcher, and the lab will always be predominantly epilepsy focused.
Do you know what I think a great thing about, and you tell me your opinion, but a great thing about for patients and families indeed being interested in research is that it gives you something positive to focus on, especially if you know that you have refractory epilepsy. So myself, for instance, I'm pretty much, as kind of been said, likely to always have refractory epilepsy, even though I've had surgery, which was like one of the best things I've ever done. Certainly not easy, but it was one of the best things I've ever done. But I'm always going to have that fear of seizures. I'm always forever going to be on anti-epileptic drugs, which is not exactly, uplifting. But meeting other people like yourself through Epilepsy Research UK, learning about your labs, learning about what you're doing and how exciting that is, that gives us something really cool to think about, which is wonderfully distracting from all the other stuff that might be going on in our brains. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's good that it can have such a positive effect, to be honest. And virtually every epilepsy research lab that I know in the UK, that their research is either directly translational or clinical, and focused to try and help patients ultimately in the end. So patients can sleep well at night knowing that if we ever do get money to research epilepsy, it is to try and make a difference.
You know what I think is important, and again, tell me what you think, is that our expectations are managed. So I come across, there we go, the nod. And I think this is completely normal, especially for people who are not, otherwise haven't really looked into research, is that we need to manage expectations that, you know, you can be doing some research into, say, a temporal lobe and how seizures originate from there, especially if it's, you know, so you have sclerosis there. Why does that cause seizures? But if you find out the reason or reasons for that, potentially, which is going to be never ending, no doubt, that doesn't mean you can use the C word, being cure.
Yeah.
And it's a much longer road than that. What do you say?
Absolutely. This is one of the questions I get asked as well. Is there a cure for epilepsy? Is it around the corner? And the problem is epilepsy is such a multifaceted disorder. We don't fully understand how it comes around, how it manifests, and how we can treat it. The biggest problem we have at the moment is that I think anyway, is that we don't see properly how the brain generates what we call epileptogenic networks. We see the end result, we see the seizures, and that's what we treat. But by the time that starts, the whole process is, you know, we can't reverse the process of epileptogenesis at the moment, and I can't see that happening over the very near future. I might be wrong. There might be people who think that knows, you know, people working in translational research may suggest something else. So my goal in my research is to do something slightly different and to try and identify biomarkers, like I say, of a patient's, should we say, career with epilepsy.
That's a nice word for it. Oh, great. Let me talk about my career of epilepsy. Top notch.
To inform about it. I mean, of course, there's always going to be new developments in pharmacological treatments with epilepsy. There hasn't been many developments recently. Ultimately, virtually all licensed therapies at the moment are treating the seizures, and there's some good therapies out there, and a lot of them work really well for a lot of patients.
Yep.
But to use the word cure, you need to be able to reverse the process that started the seizures in the first place. And at the moment, we're not there.
And especially those with brain injury, it makes me think, how do you reverse that process? Like, do you stop them from having an accident? I don't know. Maybe I'm just being really, I just don't get it.
Well, no, it's a good question. The brain's difficult to regenerate. This is one of the issues we face also in neurodegenerative disorders as well. But there's been some progress there as well. For example, you can use stem cells to regenerate neurons, and that's been done increasingly effectively in other disorders. We've seen some nice results in Parkinson's disease in clinical trials, for example. Who knows whether that ever can be done in epilepsy? But epilepsy is a different animal. There's lots of different causes. It can start in different areas of the brain. The mechanisms can be different, and so it's just,
yeah. I think when you think about how many neurons, but then how many synapses do we have, then how many ion channels we have in our brain, like how I think it's rarely understood that the combination of all those things interacting, plus a million outside factors and genes and everything, it's kind of complex.
Yes, absolutely, very complex.
Tell us about your team.
Okay, yeah, the team at the moment consists of, we have a couple of postdocs, one clinical fellow being the lead, and there's around about 10 PhD students and a couple of MRes students, master's degree students. Everyone other than Gilead is non-clinical, so they've come through science programs and they want to do research using MRI scans to see what's going on in the various epilepsy categories. So in particular, we have the focal epilepsies, where the seizures, of course, starting from a particular part of the brain, but we also have the genetic generalized epilepsies as well. Mm-hmm. So we have programs of research in both, and some of the students are using really advanced methods to generate pretty pictures, really pretty pictures. But it's more than just pretty pictures in the research. It has to mean something. And one particular area that the whole lab at the moment is interested in is looking at how the brain is networked and communicates with other parts of the brain. And we're finding that if we can do some really nice MRI scanning, we can identify that, for example, in patients who don't respond to neurosurgery as well as others, those particular patients have networked abnormalities, shall we say. We can actually see that in their scans that a neuroradiologist wouldn't see by just looking at their structural scans. We can run all of our computational techniques and get a classification of how well they would do after surgery in terms of having a seizure or not.
And so therefore, should a patient or their carer's family be presented with that information, that could seriously impact their decision, will I have surgery or not?
Absolutely. And that's the goal, is to give the neurosurgeons, the neurologists, the whole epilepsy multidisciplinary team as much information as they can to talk with the patient to decide whether surgery is the right option for them. And of course, surgery is still, as you know, it's really efficacious for the vast majority of patients. Very rarely does it result in worse epilepsy, or does the epilepsy stay the same. It usually always gets better. And a lot of people think that it's underused.
Yes, and everyone I say this to, and I don't know if I've mentioned it to you before, but I had uncontrolled seizures for 22 years before surgery was even considered, which is ridiculous in retrospect. Imagine how less negatively my life may have been impacted by seizures had I had that surgery earlier. And of course, how much money would have been saved for the taxpayer, because there'd be fewer trips to A&E, I'd be on less drugs, I would possibly need to see a therapist less, all these different things, be more effective in the workplace, or, it's just a ripple effect. So I really agree, far more people should have access to surgery, but then also that more people who are considering surgery should realize they won't be offered surgery by a medical professional if the potential benefits outweigh the risks. Yeah. So it's not something that I don't think should be as scary as many people seem to think that it is.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is why it is maybe surprisingly so important to do research in the early stages of epilepsy. One goal of the research that we're doing at the moment is to, like I said earlier, identify who will become refractory in the future from the point of being diagnosed with epilepsy.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
And if you can identify right from the beginning who's going to become refractory, you could potentially fast track those patients in the right patients to surgery or other invasive measures, or just something that would help supplement the standard, taking drugs to get those seizures under control faster, because that's what it's about. We need to get those seizures under control as fast as possible.
And another reason I think that this work like yours is worth investing in is because if I think of, for instance, when I fell on a railway line due to a seizure, I freaked loads of people out. Well, not that I can remember it, but just common sense, that would have freaked a lot of people out. That stopped the train in rush hour. Lucky I didn't get run over, obviously, or get electrocuted. And I want to make the public aware that, they should be getting their MP to say, we got to, invest more in this, because it's good for that other person on the platform. It's brilliant if patients like myself, like so many other people who, especially those who have more severe epilepsy, more seizures every day, because some people have hundreds a day, don't they? They need this help so that we can better the lives of humans as a species. It sounds quite blunt and frank, but I really believe that, and that's why your work is so valuable.
Absolutely. And one thing that we haven't cracked as well completely is knowledge about how to treat epilepsy as a bystander, the stigma associated with having an epileptic seizure. I mean, I've seen people in the streets having a seizure, and the vast majority of people standing around don't know what to do. And I still find this crazy right now. I think the vast majority of people who are watching this will hopefully know that if someone's having a seizure in the street, you effectively make them as comfortable as possible, but let them have the seizure. Don't put your hands in the mouth. I've seen somebody put the hands.
And you've seen it. Oh no! How
try and grab the tongue. You just please never do this. And then you still see people kind of walking away. What's going on? And it's because that's the stigma associated with having an epileptic seizure, and we need to educate as many people as possible.
And also not just those who have these tonic-clonic seizures, to which we were referring to, but also those who have some sort of focal seizure where they might look drunk. And I was actually, well, I started with a focal seizure. Then I think went through to tonic-clonic because I was found on the floor, unfortunately, outside a pub. And yes, I had had a couple of drinks, but I'd had a seizure. And it was assumed that I was just off my face. And that's why I was unconscious on the floor and I was locked up for the night. Now, if the police and people around me had known that actually you can't just assume that somebody is wasted. There could be something neurological behind that. I think so. It's really important that we have more people in positions of authority educated regarding this. There was even, oh my goodness. So Sandor, who's a professor from Denmark, he did a presentation last week and it was, no, sorry, Sandor, it wasn't Sandor's one. It was, who's the chap's name? But anyway, so it was about non-epileptic seizures. And there was this chap who in the UK at King's College Hospital, I believe, don't sue me, King's, I think it was, and he was having a seizure. And I looked at him and I was like, that doesn't look like an epileptic seizure to me. And it wasn't, but they were doping him up with drugs, anti-epileptic drugs. And then he was basically in the hospital for 4 days because of those. And so it's really, we need to also educate medical staff, I think, on this, because even in some of the best, Kings has saved my life before multiple times. So I think they're absolutely wonderful. But what is shocking is when you do come across medical professionals who can't see the difference between different types of seizures.
Yeah, it is difficult. I'm not a clinician, but I do know of the extensive training that's required. But and nowadays, epileptologists are very good at this, but they've gone through extensive training to identify what is and is not an epileptic seizure.
And do you know what? I'm totally digressing here, but I noticed that we also need to educate, and this is where I think that you can come in with your exciting research, people with epilepsy, because lots of people with epilepsy have no idea about really what epilepsy is generally. Partially that some people will avoid it because it's scary, that makes it real. Some people don't have access to information, and some people are very, unfortunately, poorly influenced by people around them, especially in certain countries, not to generalize, and it almost takes away even the idea of them looking for the research that goes into epilepsy.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is why organizations such as Epilepsy Sparks and other charities have such a fundamental and important role in this. It's a resource that provides a bridge for patients. You get the basic information about what's going on as well, but also links to frontline research as well.
Yeah, and ask questions, right? Because that's what research is all about, isn't it? It's questions. I think that the more you know, or learn rather, the more you realize you don't know, which can be intimidating, but it's also exciting. And that's one of the things that I imagine drives you in your work, right?
That's science. Every question leads to two questions.
More questions.
Yeah. Absolutely. So every answer leads to two more questions. Yeah, always does.
And so that just shows why we need more staff, why we need more scientists, because you can't cope with absolutely everything. But then I would also say that's where patient involvement is really important, because we can help you prioritize what's important to us. Like, for instance, is it the mental health side of things? How does not just having seizures, but taking the drugs, societal stigma, how does that all impact us? And then how can you possibly, and this is where Epilepsy Research UK is really good as well, how can we channel funding for research in the right way that is going to make a positive difference to patients and families, both short-term and long-term?
Yeah. There definitely needs to be a line of communication at the very least between patients and the researchers, for example, because only then will we know what's important, what's the most important questions to address.
What do you think are the most important questions to address now?
Well, I suppose it depends on what's achievable and what's not achievable. The most important question is the cure, of course, but because that might not be achievable in the short term, my particular, and of course I can only comment on what's amenable to my research methods, which would be very different from somebody working, for example, in a lab. So our goals might be very different, but from my point of view, it would be to better understand why patients have comorbidities, what's the underlying root of these, and whether they can be fixed. So lots of patients do have problems with memory. This is one of the big problems that patients complain of in in consultation. And like you say, some patients say that's more of an issue than the seizures themselves. And
also you feel so self-conscious. It's like, I'm going to forget. And then that anxiety can make you forget more. And then you get on this, anyway, carry on, sorry.
Yeah, well, we don't understand why that's the case for the large part. We don't know why the comorbidities occur in epilepsy largely. And this is why research needs to be done in that area. And like I said, the other area is trying to find markers of what will happen to a patient through their lifetime with epilepsy, how they'll respond to treatment. These are the important questions I find that I can do as a non-clinician. So it's been clinically informative as much as it can be, but from a non-clinical perspective and non-clinical resources. Because I'm a frustrated clinician. I want to be an epilepsy doctor to help patients on the front.
Really?
Oh yeah, I'd love to be. I was never clever enough to do medicine.
Okay, everyone, he says this all the time. Okay, but yeah, whatever.
But what we do need is we need the scientists such as myself to work with the clinicians and the patients together to address the most important research questions.
And I actually really liked the term you used before. I don't know if you got that from me, but I think this bridge between different groups of people involved in epilepsy care and research is really important. So a bridge between scientists, between epileptologists, between neuropsychiatrists as well, absolutely crucial, and GPs, in fact, general practitioners, because that's often a stumbling block for people with epilepsy. I spoke to somebody the other day who has gone to see their GP, said, look, I need referral to a neurologist because after 20 years, my seizures have started again and I don't know why. And of course, she's at high risk of SUDEP now. And the GP refuses to re-refer her. And that is absolutely crazy. So if we could get GPs, for instance, most of whom are lovely, of course, but as a whole, if we can get them to be more aware of what you're doing behind the scenes and vice versa, and then we can, I think as a whole, we can potentially, and I'm putting this very simply, but achieve more together and be more precise in how we help people. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. There are some GPs that are taking active interest in epilepsy, and for example, in the Northwest, we have the Northwest Epilepsy Research Group meeting. I think there's lots of areas around the country that have the same, and we have GPs that attend, particular GPs that attend this meeting, and they have an interest in epilepsy care and epilepsy research, and they're supported by, for example, epilepsy nurses who are just amazing.
Oh my God, I love them so much. Again, we need more of these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Epilepsy nurses and GPs who are increasing their knowledge and their training about epilepsy. It's happening. It's happening, but it needs to happen on a wider level, I think.
And so I say to everyone, Google those things, because I would say that probably over 50% of people affected by epilepsy don't even know that those professions exist.
Yeah.
Or that we have groups of GPs who are specifically interested in epilepsy, and yes, of course, the loudest voices do tend to be those who are having poor experiences. But I do think that it's important for us all to know that we are cared for and there are people that are concerned behind the scenes, and everyone write it down. Maybe I'll put a bit on the website about it, but again, like you've said, and like I just continuing to say and prove, memory is an issue. So for instance, I'll often go to the neurologist and forget what I've said and forget what they've told me, and this is a real issue for care, for everything basically. If you can't remember what your healthcare is supposed to be. And I think often especially if your memory is quite poor, if you have learning disabilities as well, and if you have anxiety, all of this stuff really influences your ability to not forget, taking your pills, but actually remember what you've been told to do. And simple things like this aren't necessarily being addressed. So generally speaking, I think it's really important that, these messages are communicated to researchers, again, so we can figure out what we need to focus on.
I couldn't agree more with you. I couldn't say it better.
Oh, thank you. But again, this just shows why it's important for people like yourself and patients, why there has to be patient involvement, because then you understand and it gets you thinking oh, okay, maybe we'll redirect. Although I have to say, I completely love what you're doing. And I really, really value the work of your lab so much. And I think what's crucial for many of us patients is to recognize that research that's being done by, say, your lab right now is honestly, probably unlikely to impact us imminently. but we need to recognize that people of the future can benefit from that. And how nice is that? That's
absolutely. The good thing about the connection between patients and researchers now is that the vast majority of grant applications that you put in to fund your research, there is always a part to fill in about patient involvement now. And of course, Epilepsy Research UK has this. The major research councils have this, which is Medical Research Council. You have to tell them how this will benefit patients, how it's important to them, and how you've interacted with them in the build-up to your projects, so they can get a good feel of how important the research is to the patient.
Yeah. You know, and again, that's something that gives me this gooey feeling. I didn't even know that this was something for patients to do until, maybe a couple of years ago. And I guess, maybe, I don't know, you tell me how many sort of years ago, it wasn't something that was really it wasn't something that people used to do, researchers used to have to do. Is that correct?
That's right. I think that's the case. I mean, I've only seen this over the last maybe 10 years coming into grant applications, but it could have existed at a longer time.
Yeah,
I'm only 44, Tori, so...
You look younger, you honestly do. And I'm an awful liar because I can't remember details of when I've lied, so I just don't bother doing it.
Okay.
So you really don't look it at all.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. Well, what I was getting at is that people with a bit more experience than me will be able to answer that question, whether those pathways were required in grant applications years ago.
So I think that we now are living in a great time, that the patient involvement is really appreciated. It is a key part in grant applications. It is recognised as not something just valuable actually in grant applications, but along the process of research, so that we can kind of keep on top of what you're doing, and that you can value influence from patients, whether the grant is supposed to last for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be, so that you can kind of keep on track and we can have some sort of involvement, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. There needs to be a clear mechanism for that happening, and a clear platform. It's not always clear how that will happen. So you can, for example, an institution can generate a forum and invite patients and get feedback that way. But other than doing that and working through charities, it's not very clear how to continuously get feedback from patients, and that is something that needs to improve.
Maybe that. Well, if I don't forget about the idea, that's something maybe Epilepsy Sparks can help in. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, the communication between patients and the researchers needs to be very clear. The pathways needs to be clear, and of course, the patients need to be aware that they can influence all the research.
Well, and this is why I'm doing this, so that, guys, you can communicate with researchers. There are contact details. You guys are there to better our lives and better society. And you welcome people coming forward saying, I don't know, what would you particularly welcome? You tell us.
Well, of course, the thing is to get a lowdown on what aspects of the disorder that the patients find most problematic, most disturbing, what areas of their life is impacted the most, because we know that epilepsy significantly affects quality of life in lots of different ways. In what ways does that impact on those individual patients? The projects and the areas of research that we think that are important, are they important to you as a patient? These are the kind of conversations that we need to have. And
I think one last question: what makes your lab in some ways cooler than other labs? What are you doing? What's your USP? You've caught me out there. I know, right? I hate that question. Sorry.
It's a difficult question to answer, because there are so many fantastic labs around the country and indeed around the world doing things. And as a lab, you need to find a niche.
Yeah.
Something that makes you a little bit more different from everyone else. So then people know, that's the lab that does this particular kind of research. So you need to have the right ideas at the right time. And that's quite difficult. One thing that we seem to be doing quite well in imaging in epilepsy in Liverpool is looking at how the brain communicates with other parts of the brain and using that information to improve the diagnosis of epilepsy and predict outcomes. They're the areas that I would say is our signature at the moment.
Well, I don't think I can say anything, but that just sounds wonderful, I think, to all of us. And that's what we want. So cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Simon. Thank you for giving us hope. And remember, everyone, if you want to connect with Simon and his lab, just go to, what's your URL?
Oh, it ends up being a long link.
Or go through Epilepsy Sparks. Go through our website and under labs, and the link is there. There's a short description and a link to your website there. That's easier.
That's right. The alternative way is just to go to the University of Liverpool website and in the search engine put in Keller, and then you'll find everything you need.
Perfect. Thank you for listening, everybody. And also, we are going to be doing a podcast very shortly. So for people who are more into podcasts, you'll be able to check that out. Be released in a few weeks. But yeah, and if there's anything that's come up, any questions that for whatever reason you would rather send to myself, just give me a shout, just do that, and I can forward them on to Simon, or if I can answer them, I will do so. Thank you for listening, everyone. Cheers, Simon.
You're welcome.
Bye.